Call now with your question. 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
And we are back live, having a whole lot of fun with Karl Keating, our founder and senior fellow here at Catholic Answers. I am your host, Tim Staples. Want to mention real quick, I will be here as both guest and host for the next hour, so keep those calls coming. But as promised, we're going to get right back to the phone lines. We're going to go to Jason right now. Hint, hint to the folks in the control room. Jason, calling from St. Louis, Missouri, listening on our Catholic Answers app. Hello, Jason.
Hi, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing great. Welcome to the broadcast. What's your question for Karl?
Well, my question is this. The Bibles that are still in existence today that were written or produced, I guess, between, well, I guess go as far back as when the canon was defined, up to pre-Reformation times. Do those Bibles include the books that are in the Catholic Bible but not in the Protestant Bible?
Yes, although keep in mind that in the early centuries there were various strains or lineages of manuscripts, and they varied a little bit. And it wasn't until the early or into the 4th century that the councils of the church, such as Carthage and Hippo, decided what the canon of the Bible should be. That is, what books were inspired and belonged in the Bible, and what other books, which might have been very helpful and maybe entirely true in terms of their doctrinal teaching, but simply weren't inspired and therefore didn't belong in the Bible. So it took the church some while to work this out. But by the time that 1,500 years had passed, we had come to the Reformation, yes, the church was clear on what books were in the Bible, and those are the same books we have in the Catholic Bible today. The Protestant reformers weren't entirely happy with some of those. Luther, for example, called the Epistle of James an Epistle of Straw, as you know. But particularly in the Old Testament, there were some books that they didn't like. Maccabees, of course. Second Maccabees, a very famous passage regarding, or as a point in favor of the existence of purgatory. If you don't want there to be purgatory or don't believe in purgatory, that's a bit of a reason for finding an excuse to get rid of that book and similar books. So what they did is to argue, these early reformers, that they would accept the Jewish canon, as they understood it, of the Old Testament, the Palestinian canon that was more restrictive, where a wider Alexandrian canon included these other texts that, in fact, the church, so to speak, baptized and said were part of Scripture. So you've got this distinction, and it's a curious thing to me. I never quite understood why these Protestant reformers would not accept the authority of Christian councils, but would accept the authority of a Jewish determination from the early centuries. So anyway, however that may be, the practical matter is that the reformers dropped 7 books out of the Old Testament, and that's formed the 66 books of the Bible that the Protestants have been using, most of them since. Although some of their Bibles in between the Old and New Testaments will have those books, or some of them, in a kind of intermediate position, both physically and in terms of honor. They'll put them in there. But for the most part, the Protestants, especially evangelicals and fundamentalists, believe that those particular books ought not to be considered part of the Bible. But in that, they're actually adopting a fairly modern invention, invention of their own, going back only a few centuries.
And Jason, that was something, and Karl, that really rocked my world all those years ago when I discovered, and I had to ask that question, Karl, why am I accepting a canon that was established by Jewish authorities a couple hundred years after Christ, whereas you mentioned the Alexandrian canon, which was a sort of a canon, the closest thing to a canon before the time of Christ, right. And it had all those books, and that was back when the Jews possessed the oracles of God, as St. Paul would say in Romans 3. It just didn't make sense.
But the real question that I've sometimes enjoyed putting to people who were once in your position, or the position you once were in, if you accepted the Jewish determination of what constituted the Old Testament, why don't you accept the Jewish determination of what constitutes the New Testament, which is zero books? Okay.
And that Jesus Christ is not the Son of God.
That's right.
I mean, those same people rejected Christ.
Yeah, so there's an inconsistency there. And you have to, I think, go and look at the personal histories of the Reformers, their particular theological and philosophical issues and problems, to understand why they took the route they did, rather than simply accepting the canon as had been accepted almost universally until that point. Absolutely. Why they didn't continue with it while they went off to make their own churches.
Exactly. Jason, thanks so much for your call.